Welcome, everybody. So glad to have you all with us as we are beginning our Lunch and Learn series for 2023, Decriminalizing and Destigmatizing Sex Work, What Social Workers Need to Know. And I want to invite everyone to join us in our land acknowledgement. Please use the chat to introduce yourself and acknowledge the land where you are located. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking from Unama'ki, which is in Mi'kma'ki, and indeed the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers is in Mi'kma'ki. This is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, whose inherent rights were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties that were signed from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. The treaties were later reaffirmed by Canada in Section 35 of the Constitution Act in 1982, and they remain active to this day. The Nova Scotia College of Social Workers joins our members and our communities in the necessary labor of reconciliation. We are grateful to live and work together as treaty people in Mi'kma'ki. Please join with me in the chat, introducing yourself, acknowledging the land where you are located. You might need to Google to learn the Indigenous name for where you are joining us from. And please think of the lands, territories, and Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live within these lands, and how each of us individually and as a collective body of social workers can hold ourselves accountable to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples here and across Turtle Island. We are all treaty peoples. Walaliu, thank you all. And with that, I do want to invite us to take a moment to pause in gratitude for all of the wise Mi'kmaq elders and Ilnu community leaders who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this land. May we all join them in this work. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways that colonization fills our world with harmful energy, for the ways it has perpetuated genocide, white supremacy, queerphobia, and the destruction of our planet. Let us take this moment to affirm our commitment to join in the important work of decolonization, which has affected so many. Let us take this moment to commit to justice and healing. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all human beings, and as an expression of our gratitude, as well as an expression of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we all must begin to learn and honor. May our session today lead us to be in right relationship with this land and one another. I want to take this moment also to thank Samantha King, registered social worker, who first approached me and the Professional Development Committee about organizing this event. I also want to thank our First Voice participants, those who are joining us now, and also those who joined us for the first event that had to get rescheduled. And I wanted to just say a few words about why this is so important to us, the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. This is part of a national advocacy campaign that the Canadian Association of Social Workers has done, and you can go onto their website to learn more about their paper on decriminalization, exit strategies, and the social determinants of health. The issues around how we live in a police state and the ways in which the criminalization of what we do is, and the ways in which sexuality has been criminalized is part of a much larger issue. It is absolutely connected to issues around colonization and justice, and there's so much that needs to happen. This is the beginning of a much larger conversation, and thank you, Rebecca, for sharing in the chat about the Canadian Association position statement. And with all of that, I want to invite Sam to first begin and share a little bit more about herself and why she has wanted to get involved in this and get us, the Nova Scotia College, involved in this. And then we have two first voice participants who will be speaking and sharing a little bit about what they feel social workers need to know about this issue. So with that.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction, Ed. And hello, everyone. My name is Sam. I use the pronouns she and her, and I also live here in Kitchipuktuk. So yeah, the reason why I feel very passionate about this concern, this issue, is because over COVID, working in healthcare and just with all the movements and the polarizations and concerns that were raised, I noticed that there was a very important marginalized group that had been being left out of the conversation. And although it's challenging in terms of advocacy, oftentimes in our work, when one voice is raised, another voice is silenced. There really hasn't been a whole lot of education sessions on the whole for social workers and clinicians to better understand this population, what the differences are between sex work and human trafficking, for example, and how we can come from an anti-discriminatory, anti-oppressive practice approach to make those folks feel safe in accessing social work care, as well as just health care on the whole. So sex workers have been very much affected by COVID, and yet there's really been no discussion about it that I've seen, aside from in the community. There's it's very hard to do that type of work, period, let alone when there's all these restrictions and there's the silencing and the stigma around supporting this population. So I'm really hoping bringing this to the table today will help us move forward in making those folks feel safe and accessing our care, whether it's through counseling or through going to the hospital, or for other different social work concerns, as well as helping us understand how we can advocate for the legalization of sex work, because there's many different policies and entities in Nova Scotia, especially, that make it very, very hard for sex workers to feel safe in accessing basic needs such as emergency services, social work services, healthcare, getting help in other ways. Another reason why it's really important to me is because back in 2018, I started taking a pole dancing classes as a hobby. And I very quickly realized, even just in that hobby space, how there's been a lot of whitewashing and erasure of sex work, even though, pole dancing comes from stripping. And so I'm really hoping that we can better understand how that's really problematic and how that kind of parallels, even in like a hobby space, some of the very things that we may do inadvertently as social workers, and how we can stop oppressing this population, whether it's conscious or not, and to better understand how we can support them and be more informed about some of the issues, as well as the importance around allowing people to have sovereignty over their bodies and choice, especially in light of our v. Wade being overturned. We don't want to further worsen situations like that. And so yeah, that's why I really wanted to bring this up, and I'm really excited to hear from our panelists, because they are just so knowledgeable and wonderful, and I've learned a lot from them already in our prep conversations, as well as just in my work as a therapist working with sex workers.
So I have made Amanda visible, and Amanda has agreed to have the camera on. Stella is also joining us. Stella is keeping her camera off. So I'm not able to feature her, but you will still hear her voice, so that you're able to hear from both of them as they join with us. So I'm going to invite both Amanda and Stella to say a few words of introduction. And the question that we started with, and we figure it's going to be an informal conversation, but is, what would you like social workers to know or understand about sex work? So Amanda, I'm going to start with you if you're comfortable going, and then we'll go to Stella, just since you're on the camera.
Hey everyone, I'm Amanda. I also reside in, I'm going to brutally do this pronunciation, Kitchipuktuk. My pronunciation of that is horrible. But for me, it's really important for social workers to understand that sex workers, on the bottom line of it, are people. And, they have a lot of feelings and how they do their work. With sex work, one thing that needs to be recognized is you have consenting sex workers, which are people that are willingly there to do it. You have people that are being trafficked, which is the thing we want to prevent the most and provide safety and support for those people. And then you may encounter people that are survival sex workers. They might not be forced into it by someone else per se, but they feel like they may have to be forced into doing it due to the circumstances that they're in. And with social workers, you may deal with people like that, such as people that may have addiction problems, people that may have mental illness, people that might not have good family support systems.
Thank you so much. Stella, do you want to unmute? And if there's anything you'd like to start us off with talking about.
Hi, I'm Stella. Similar to what Amanda said, there are a lot of misconceptions about what sex work is, and there are people that come into it through different ways. I'm currently retired, but I used to do full service sex work and stripping. And sex work really encompasses a large umbrella because it does include stripping and full service sex work, but also includes virtual online sex work. As you can see, I don't have a camera on because I don't feel safe doing that, but that is a means of work for people who feel the other way from me. They feel safer at home and being on camera than out in person. Yeah.
Thank you. So I appreciate both of you beginning, or all of you really helping us begin to understand the differences between sex work and human trafficking and the range of ways that this might play itself out to social workers. What are some other concerns that you've had or people you know have had when engaging with healthcare workers or social workers, ways in which there are barriers that perhaps social workers can be able to help address or overcome? So whoever wants to start. And Sam, you, if you feel comfortable sharing because of your work with other people who have not been able to join us on camera, grateful to have you as well share. So all of you, thank you so much.
For myself is, being treated with the same courtesies as say a doctor walks in to get a service, you know what I mean? Being treated like a human being. Sometimes you get overlooked because of what you do. Sometimes doctors, you immediately feel judgment if you tell them you're a sex worker when you're even just going in for a simple procedure or to get medication. So it's something that often that you would hide or be afraid to tell people because of the stigma around it and because you're scared of being judged when you're really just looking out for your own personal welfare and wanting to access a service. And as someone who, pays taxes and puts into the healthcare system, you should have access to that without being judged on it. But often enough, people just hear sex worker and you're immediately feeling like, and then, the way people look at you, you're immediately made to feel small. So approaching it with the same compassion that you would treat any other client. And, without that judgment, be like, oh, and, as long as someone feels safe and happy, then with what they're doing, then you can go with that per person. Now, if you deal with a sex worker or someone that might be being trafficked, that's scared, you want to try and help them be willing to give you that information and talk to it without feeling like they're going to be judged or you're scrutinizing them.
Thank you so much. And I do want to take this opportunity to also let everyone know that this is the first of hopefully many more conversations on this topic with both Stella and Amanda, but also potentially with others as well. And there is actually a human trafficking conference that we are working on for later in this spring. But we intentionally wanted to do this separately because of the stigma around this, and wanting to ensure that people who choose sex work are have an opportunity to have their unique needs known. Stella, I think you were getting ready to unmute, so I want to quiet myself so you can speak.
Perfect. Yeah, I too, I chose sex work willingly. Personally, I found sex work more empowering, I guess, and better for myself. And when I'm speaking about it right now, I'm talking about full service sex work. I found it more better for myself than I found random hookups. Like, I would feel very empty doing one night stands versus sex work, which is a notion that people might not expect or realize from sex work. So I would like to put that out there, because in addition to Amanda's comment, when I would go to the doctor, I felt more safe lying, saying that I just hooked up with a bunch of people and needed to get checked regularly for that reason than I did admitting that I was a full service sex worker. But also, I found it very difficult to be kind of like asked and questioned, because I, in my day-to-day life, present as someone who just seems like a very like straight edge vanilla kind of person, that wouldn't do either of these things. That when a healthcare professional is like, why are you here? It's only been like a couple months, like you don't need this. It's really hard to answer that, especially when the tone comes from such a place where I don't know what your views are. I don't know where you stand. I can only afford to come into a walk-in clinic right now. So like, I don't have a rapport with you. So if you are someone who is working in like a walk-in, just to be like aware of that, whether it is like counseling or healthcare or whatever, because I don't get to pick you. Whereas right now I am lucky and I have a counselor, and I got to research and see what her views were before going into her. Back then, I didn't have that kind of luck. So just to be aware of that, even when dealing with like walk-in clients, would be something that I would say important to keep mind of.
You. And I wonder, Sam, as you're listening to Stella and Amanda, if there are a few other like thoughts that you have about things that you've seen or things that people have shared with you.
Totally. Yes. Thanks so much for sharing. Yeah, from the therapist angle, because that's the field I work in. I'm both a registered nurse and a social worker, and so I do counseling therapy. A very common question on any intake questionnaire or like any first visit is like, what do you do for work? And I'd say 100% of the time, whenever it's a client who's involved in sex work, they'll say they work in like insurance or like marketing or what. It's never what they actually do, for a valid reason, because there's a genuine fear of being judged, and they want to make sure that you're a safe person and that you're going to be supportive to them. And so my general approach in when I discover that I'm working with someone and they disclose that that's the work they do, I just provide a non-judgmental, curious space. I thank them for sharing, because I've realized in the society we live in, it's very hard to offer up the information, and I let them know that, like, hey, that's great that you do that. Want to learn more about it. However, I understand that you're here for your mental health and well-being. we don't necessarily need to make this the focus of every conversation that you happen to do sex work, because a lot of sex workers have expressed to me how frustrating it can be. They're coming in maybe because they want to work on their, boundaries or their social anxiety, and then the therapist or the counselors can kind of continuously bringing up the sex work and asking them with questions, and it's really kind of taken away from the main reason why they're seeking counseling. Sure, we want to assess and make sure that they're safe and that there could be potentially an overlap in that concern, but a lot of the time it's just one part of their identity or one part of their life. It's not the whole reason why they're coming to see a social worker or a psychologist. And so just to be very mindful of that and making sure that we're not making that like in the limelight of the conversation and making them uncomfortable and being unhelpful.
And that, of course, is part of our code of ethics, that we're here to help the person in front of us, not addressing our own needs. But we unconsciously may have a variety of biases or assumptions. And so that's really where this kind of lunch and learn is an opportunity for people to ask questions as well. So please put in the Q&A so any questions that you all might have that are attending. And then Amanda and Stella, are you aware of anything that like people do that is really helpful to create safe space from a health worker or counselor or social worker perspective?
I actually have a friend who's a social worker, and we've had some cool discussions about this. Actually, I think she's in here watching today. But, one thing she's always told me when she finds out one of her clients may be a sex worker, she's always goes, sex work is work. And she told me that she gets a really cool response from that, from people that are like, oh, and feel more comfortable opening up to her. So acknowledging that it's work, but without prying into it. Like, you want someone to be willing to give you information, but if you are coming from a standpoint where you maybe never worked with a sex worker before, you might have all these questions start to come up in your head where you're like, oh, but you don't want to bombard them and scare them off from being able to talk to you. So letting them know that you're open to talking about it, that you're comfortable with what they do, but without, letting them give you once you let them know you're comfortable with it, let them give you the information. I mean, you can ask some questions, but you don't want to bombard them and then like kind of scare them off. Be like, oh, this is, someone's way too into this. So, giving them a safe space, letting them know it's a safe space and that you're comfortable with the fact, and you're not, it's a job. Just like, going to waitress at a restaurant or going to work at an office. It's the same thing. It's a job. Now, if you run across someone in your work that you may feel is being trafficked or forced into it, that's when you might want to try and get a little more information out of them so you can help them. But again, you don't want to scare anyone off from seeking your services.
Thank you. And Stella, it looked like you were also getting ready to unmute.
Yeah, I just was like, oh, Amanda said that all so eloquently, and I don't really know what else to add right now.
Awesome. Well, one of the things that we all had discussed previously to this session was not only sort of what you think that social workers need to know about you, but also some of the ways in which maybe social workers need to better understand some of your clients, or some of the ways in which what you do is therapeutic as well for some people. And if you can share a little bit to help people have maybe a broader understanding of what sex work is and how it might be helping people.
So
one thing.
You know what? Let's Stella go first. Stella, go for it.
Okay. One thing with sex work is I find that especially with regular clients, they're looking for connection. They're just looking for that same kind of like human interaction and respect. But they sometimes they're either like not interested in dating, which I actually commend them for, because they're like, I know exactly what I want and I just want sex and I will pay someone for that and avoid any of the other stuff that might come with using a person. Or we get people who just like that, like kind of companionship, and that's actually like what they're coming in for more. Sometimes you'll get someone who's like, I don't really have that much experience, and I find it a little less stressful to, you know, book someone who does and whose expectations of myself are a little bit lower, just because like they don't have to. I'm not expecting like every client who walks in to be like, oh yeah, like it's going to be exactly like this, because similar to like counseling, like they're just people. Like so the type of clientele that we get can vary. Sometimes I will say with full service sex work, we do get people who do have those connotations of, oh, it's exactly like this. And that's where we have to put our foot down. But that doesn't happen as often as the other things. I find usually people who at least I've serviced in the past have been very respectful, and they know what they want or what they're looking for. And we correspond through email before our appointments to book. And so what I would do is see if I could provide whatever services. So if I had someone coming in for like role play, they'd say like, oh, maybe like this and that. And if I could do it, great. If not, then I would try to like refer them to a friend or someone who is capable of fulfilling various roles.
Amanda, did you want to share anything?
Yeah, like for myself, I come into this from an adult entertainer side. I don't do full service myself, but I, you know, sex work is work, and I support any of my friends that have done it. But for me, working in clubs has been a really like fun time for me. And the clients do vary. You'll have like the loud party boys that come in that are there for like bachelor parties, but a lot of times too, you'll have guys that come in by themselves. And a lot of my clients throughout the year have been people that maybe are socially awkward and don't know how to go like pick up conversations regularly at a normal bar and, you know, meet women that way. So I've come in where like, you know, it's almost like they're looking for that companionship, like Stella said, where they want someone to talk to, listen to them, you know, but at the end of the day, you know, we're also there to make money. And I've also had guys that come into the club and they're like, you just want my money. And I'm like, well, I'm not here for the good of my health, you know? So you have like a lot of different funny perspectives on it. Sometimes you'll have people that are just rude or obnoxious or won't follow the rules in a venue, and you kind of just got to dust it off. But for me, 90% of the time I've spent in clubs and bars has always been a good time for me, where it's something I enjoy, I feel empowered doing, and I'm willingly there. So I've seen girls in the clubs that, you know, they look like they hate being there. And, you know, when you see someone and they look miserable at their job, you do feel terrible for them. So I've seen that side of it too, where you have a girl come in and she'll be up on stage and it looks like someone's holding a gun behind the curtain, forcing her to be up there. And, you know, you kind of feel sad. And that's where someone may be coming from it from a traffic perspective or a survival perspective.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And for helping us have a broader understanding of some of the ways in which sex work happens. I know for myself, when I worked in hospice in Philadelphia, I had a few patients who I worked with who were dying, and they had some sex workers who were with them to or not in the moment, but who provided support to them. And that was sort of the beginning of my like getting to understand sort of the perspective, the therapeutic perspective that sometimes comes with sex work and that is not often recognized. And You had, before I go into what you were saying, Amanda, about sort of the criminalization and the legalization and some of the ways in which there that might play itself out in Nova Scotia specifically. Sam, I'm wondering if you have any reflections from your work, both as a social worker and as a nurse, in terms of some of the clients or issues that sex workers might face, or the kinds of situations they might encounter, so that our members who are watching are able to have a better understanding of the range of work that happens in sex work. And also, if people have questions, again, please feel free to write.
Yeah. Oh man, there's just so much to say and not that much time. I guess one thing, an observation, just to kind of give a few points that stand out is I'm always impressed with the degree of planning and just like logistics that goes into being self-employed in this capacity. I've had clients have like they've thought of things that I would never have thought of, like such as they have maybe a separate apartment for where they do sex work full service, and then they have their own home residence for safety, or they have special kind of means to go through in terms of communication so people don't have their particulars in terms of like their personal information, their address, their real name, their real phone number, the way the advertising is so thought out. So the reason why I bring this up is just to like highlight the level of skill it takes to be a business person in this realm. A lot of things are thought of in terms of safety most of the time. And yeah, the regular STI testing and the health piece and the counseling, like sex workers are people who genuinely care about their well-being and their health, and are this is a business for them. They're entrepreneurs. They have a lot of skills, those that choose to do this. So it's always very impressive to me, the length that they go to plan things out to make sure they're safe. It is just as respectful as any business, really. Another thing that comes up in counseling sometimes, or I guess often issue, is when sex workers or even people in the adult entertainment industry, one of their goals is they're looking for a partner, and how to have those healthy conversations and communication about boundaries, and how to find companions and friends that respect their role. And so a lot of the times the work I do is supporting them in having these conversations that can be kind of difficult, in managing emotions, and trying to find the people that are aligned with their values, in terms of friends and partners. And so I find that comes up a lot, as well as sometimes, one of my specialties is trauma. So sometimes you may be working with a person who is involved in sex work in some capacity, as well as they are working through some trauma that may have been interpersonal in nature. It may have been sexual in nature, and to make sure that as part of your assessment, as part of the work, that you're not colluding the two, because that could be potentially very offensive to the person, as well as there very well may not be a link. And sometimes there can be a link. It really all depends, and to make sure that we're coming at that very sensitively and gently, and really respecting where they're at in terms of their mental health and what their goals are, and allowing them and guiding them kind of through the process of doing whatever kind of processing they need in order to meet whatever their goals is. And sometimes one last thing I'll say is burnout is a real thing in any industry. I know many of us who work in healthcare are feeling it, and sex workers do experience burnout as well. And so supporting them through that in a non-judgmental way is also really important, to make sure that they're able to get back to their work, and make sure that we're not discouraging them or like being like, oh well, I'm uncomfortable with this, I'm going to suggest some other career pathways. That's not cool. So really supporting them in their burnout, and how to have a healthy life at work, and balancing life work management, especially when a lot of sex workers travel. Sometimes my clients will go to another province, because I'm not registered there. We might not be able to meet there, and so I'm helping them set up for their wellness plan, and making sure that they have they're able to come back and everything is clear in terms of that regard.
So question came up while we were talking, and it's a great question because the person who asked the question then had a second question about it. So the question was, how should a social worker ask if the person is safe in their work? And then the follow-up question was, and how should one ask that if they were engaged in another field like construction work or waitressing, which brings up, you know, the larger issues of gender-based violence, I think, in general. But how would be helpful, Amanda?
One thing is just asking, do you enjoy your work? It doesn't, and that's a neutral question where you could ask anybody, do you enjoy your work? And, you know, it might be a yes, it might be a no, it might be sometimes they enjoy it, but like just asking, do you enjoy it? And then, you know, if they said no, or asking, do you feel safe going to your work? Do you feel comfortable there? And that's something you could ask anybody. Like somebody could be going to a construction site per se, and they might not be working for a company that has all their safety gear up to queue, or might not be following all the safety standards, and so they might not feel safe at work too. So asking questions, do you enjoy your work? Do you feel safe at your work? Isn't overly prying, but lets them know that you care about if their work is enjoyable or safe.
Thank you. Stella, do you have anything to add?
Once again, no. I actually really like that answer because I was thinking of how if someone asked me how I enjoyed my work, that would be a really good way, because I would find it a little bit insulting if someone said like, what are you doing to be safe? Or, you know, it just seems like maybe you're hinting that I don't think about these things and I'm an irresponsible person. So yeah, I really liked Amanda's answer there again.
Well, and your response is really, I think, powerful because you also said this in a previous response that was how people come with their assumptions, and because of society's stigma and the criminalization, which is something that hopefully we could talk a little more about, how does that play itself out in Nova Scotia, because not everyone may know, then the issue becomes like, people need to prove that they're safe to you, presumably, because if someone says, are you safe, that implies a judgment, even if they don't say it, right? So that's where unpacking our own stereotypes and assumptions before working with any new client is always a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Can't tell if there, yeah.
Can I add to something Sam said? Sam mentioned people that have to travel out of province. And for those of you who may not know, Nova Scotia currently has no strip clubs for people to work at. I would like to see another adult entertainment venue come into the province, but I also believe that we should have a safe legal brothel. And part of having it legalized provides safe places for not just the women well, I should say people working, because I just have primarily worked with female sex workers myself. It provides a safe legal venue for the workers, for the clientele, and it also prevents underage people from having to be put into those situations. So when we keep it safe and legal, once you push it underground, that's where you run into, you know, underage people being forced into it. That's where even it's less safe for the clients, because the clients can go to a place potentially and be robbed. And for myself, I actually have to travel out of province quite regularly. I'm lucky I have a great place in Winnipeg, Manitoba that I regularly go and work. I know the clientele there. I have safe places to stay. But the first time I went out and had to travel to a different province once we lost our adult entertainment venue, you know, you're going to another place and you're thinking about your safety. And all the time is something in the back of our mind. We're worried about our own personal safety. Am I going to go to a place? Is it going to be a place that I'm safe at? where I'm not going to be assaulted, where clients aren't going to try and, do aggressive things to me. So it's just something that we always have in the back of our mind is our safety. So don't think that we don't care about ourselves. Our safety is like our number one priority for ourselves.
So a comment in the chat was about harm reduction and having safer spaces or safe spaces in Nova Scotia. And, two of the speakers that were initially going to be part of this conversation live in a different province. And I'm wondering if any of you can say a little more about the different approaches in different parts of Turtle Island. So here in Nova Scotia, Amanda said that, things have closed down, that there's not like the legal protections. Is that true everywhere? Can you share a little more about that?
So Nova Scotia actually had 5 strip clubs in the 90s, and our city council really went after strip clubs, and strip clubs themselves aren't actually illegal, but they made the zoning pretty much impossible, and that zoning still stands today. And if you have a bar that's 19 plus, as long as people can't see from the streets what's going on, if the people going in there are all consenting, I really don't see the issue on why we have such a hatred against bringing clubs into Nova Scotia. Myself, I've worked in Newfoundland, I've worked in New Brunswick, I've worked in Ontario, and I've worked in Manitoba. Every province can actually be different on their adult entertainment laws, and larger provinces such as Ontario and Alberta can actually have different bylaws depending on what city you're going to. So I've worked in Hanover, Ontario, and the laws are quite different there than what they are in like Toronto per se. So depending on where you go, and this is from working at entertainment clubs, I pretty much will walk into a place and I'm like, what are the rules here? Because every province you go to, every town you go to can have different rules around it. But the big thing is that making sure all the women are legal age. Every single club I've ever walked into, they immediately want to see your ID when you get in there. Most places will actually take a photocopy of your ID. So if liquor inspectors come in, they don't have to go bother you while you're working. They can show that they have a copy of your ID on file. So that's something that's helpful when you go to places. But yeah, for me, just having places keeping underage women and underage people from being forced into doing it is really important when I go to places.
Thank you. Sam, Stella, would you like to add anything in terms of Nova Scotia versus other parts of Canada? And maybe also like from a legalization perspective, what you would like to see? And then I think we'll come back to that.
I was waiting for Stella to go. And yeah, there was another panelist. I really I thought I I don't want to misspeak because I'm not sure if I remember what they said correctly because our prep meeting was back in July, but it was a couple that run a business and it had something to do with in Alberta, something about you needing like a license or like a massage parlor. I don't know if you remember Amanda or Stella, but found that really interesting. And I don't want to misquote them, but yes, it's definitely not the same per province. And yeah, it's just something to be curious about as social workers, not assume that everyone's the same as as we are good at, in terms of AOP and respecting people's identities and their backgrounds. But yeah, I think I agree with what everyone said in the chat so far. I think it absolutely should be decriminalized and legal, and that I think it's a great point of contention for social workers to advocate for, like, why is the zoning the way it is? Geez, it's the 90s, were 30 years ago. Why does things have to stay the same? And just for all those points that Amanda mentioned in terms of protecting vulnerable people such as youth, people who may be being trafficked or coerced into this work, it just makes so much sense for it to be regulated as well as normalized, and then there's just less of a stigma or judgment for these folks, getting whatever service they need, whether it's healthcare or education, etc.
Thank you. Stella, you look like you're getting ready to speak.
Yeah, no, I just completely agree. I think that depending on where you go, it is very different. For example, like in the stripping side of things, some provinces, some clubs even will allow two-way contact where it's like the customer is allowed to touch you back, but other places are only one-way contact. So no matter where you go, you always have a new set of rules that you have to like learn and understand. Um, and then when it comes to full service, it also is similar, because if you're working for an agency, for example, they might have a different set of rules for like their pricing or whatever, versus if you're working for yourself and calling all the shots on rules and stuff.
Thank you. Amanda, was there anything you wanted to add?
Actually, one thing I did forget about until Sam brought up the licensing there, because I haven't worked myself, but there are some strip clubs and cities that require you to have a dancer license as well. And one thing they do in getting your license is a criminal background check. And they actually do look for prostitution charges because they do try to keep full service like sex workers out of the strip clubs or people that have been like charged with it per se. And I believe like it's more like Edmonton and I think somewhere in Ontario that also asks for the dancer's license as well. So some cities can have that into effect as well. And then, you know, for me, I would just like to see Nova Scotia become a little more open-minded to having safe legal venues for people to work at.
Thank you. I'm gonna just as we kind of begin to close out, I want to sharing this. Try this again. I wanted to share our just some of the recommendations of the Canadian Association of Social Workers and get your thoughts on it. So the Canadian Association of Social Workers in the report that was put in the chat is advocating for decriminalizing consensual sex work involving adults, as well as funding and expanding exit strategies for sex workers who wish to leave sex work through new cross-departmental federal office. We might want to be thinking, based on what Amanda just said, about the ways in which the former criminalization or criminal charges might impact people's ability to move. And then last but definitely not least, investing in the social determinants of health that have a particular impact on Canadians who are made vulnerable to entering into survival sex work or becoming trafficked. So there's a lot of recommendations that they have on that level, whether it is universal basic income, affordable housing, or also better policies to help kids in care who are aging out transition into the outside world, because those are some of the vulnerabilities that sometimes impact people entering into this field, not by choice versus by choice, which is something to think about. Do you have any other like sort of advocacy suggestions or ideas, ways that social workers listening can get involved in advocating for safer sex work?
Well, I don't know if any of you guys know about it, but it's called Stepping Stones, and it's a great organization that's actually formed in Nova Scotia to help sex workers with a lot of those things that you guys that were just mentioned, and like, you know, ways to help them get out, get educated, maybe, you know, have counseling, things like that. But really for me is just seeing people as humans and giving them compassion and treating them like you would any other profession that comes in to seek your help.
Awesome, thank you. Stella, do you have any other final thoughts or reflections for us?
Yeah, just treat people with respect. Come in with, trying to be aware of your biases. I'd say if you're really interested in supporting sex workers, do your own research too. There are a lot of good platforms on social media with very vocal sex workers. that are advocating for us, but also other agencies that we can look at to see kind of like a good model for what Nova Scotia has the potential of being.
Thank you. And Rebecca just put in the chat the Stepping Stone Nova Scotia website. And Sam, do you have any final thoughts or reflections?
Just thank you so much, Amanda and Stella. You guys are awesome. I always learn so much every time I talk to you guys. And yeah, just to, I guess, throw it out there, like, there's always a benefit to, doing our own personal self-inquiry if we feel uncomfortable talking about sex in our work, or, if the thought of sex work still kind of creates some sort of energy about that, to just, non-judgmentally be curious about that for ourselves. And I'm always a proponent of getting your own therapy. I've gone to therapy myself and it's great. And yeah, just to be kind of curious about those things. And if you are in a position where you just, you are not ready to provide, antidepressive care, then it's okay to refer out and to be aware of clinicians in the community who do that work well, and as well as the organizations like Stepping Stone and Maggie's in Toronto, etc.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a wonderful way to remind us in terms of the importance of knowing oneself. And if we're uncomfortable, part of anti-oppressive practice is being mindful of our discomfort and working on being aware of what's going on in our own story to impact that. And ethical practice means not working with people if we feel like we have our own stuff to unpack first. So that's a very important component. And the Stepping Stone is one great resource. We will reach out to them. We will also be having our conference on sex trafficking and human trafficking that we will be having later in April. And we are working with the Association of Black Social Workers, as well as with the Native Women's Association, because they both have some very important efforts going on in that area as well. So there's a lot more work to be done. But the one thing that I do want to say is, if you are concerned around human trafficking, it's always good to go to an expert for more advice around how to do that, because sometimes we can put people in danger unintentionally by trying to help or rescue them. So there's a lot more that needs to be learned around that. This was an area of my own personal practice, and I'm excited to share some of what's going on in Nova Scotia, which unfortunately is capital, one of the largest regions in Canada for that. And it likely is related to the lack of legal and safe options. And so let us all continue to advocate for more accessible housing, universal health care, universal wealth, mental health care, universal income, and decriminalization of all sexual activities that are between consenting adults. So with that, thank you all so very much. And we are so grateful, Stella, Amanda, Sam, for your generosity of time and wisdom and courage in speaking with us. Do you have any final words that you would want people to walk away with?
I just, thank you for listening, and I hope maybe that you guys learned some things today that you can apply to your practices and what you've done. And for myself, I'll never stop thinking about the safety and advocacy for people having safe legal spaces to work and do this job.
Bella, any parting words?
Yeah, thank you all so much for taking the time out of your days to have a listen at what we have to say. And yeah, I'm excited to see the change that you all bring.
Thank you. Sam, thank you so much for reaching out and wanting to help bring this project to light, which is a reminder to everyone that we are always eager to feature professional development ideas of our members. Any final words, Sam?
Yeah, just to echo the sentiment of everyone else, thank you so much. And I am very open and approachable if you want to email me to have further conversations on this topic. It's it's all part of our mandatory professional development to engage in social justice and anti-discriminatory practice. So if you ever want to consult or do a discussion group, I'm very open. My email is just samantha.king@nshealth.ca. It's very easy to find, so feel free to reach out to me if you want to have more discussions around this.
Or if you have more questions, you can always reach out to myself or just, as always, NSCSW@nscsw.org. Thank you all so much.